Hi and welcome back everybody to another reaction video where we try to learn something new and spread history on YouTube. So today I'm going to react to the video called Germany Could Not Win World War II. That's the first part. There's also a second part, and I decided to cover this video because today most Western European countries, I don't know if the US, but we celebrate VE Day, so Victory in Europe Day. And in some East European countries, I'm pretty sure it's Russia, but also in Serbia, they celebrate Victory Day on the 9th of May, so tomorrow. And tomorrow is going to be the second part. Okay, as always, if you want to see future videos, future reactions and projects, you can click the subscribe button, don't forget the ring bell. And there's also a Patreon account and a Reddit account, and everything that you need to know about this channel is in the description below. So yeah, let's just jump into the video. And if you want to suggest some videos to me to react to in the future, you can put them in the comments below. So let's just jump into the video. Futurama.
There, I've finished fine-tuning my what-if machine. It can answer any what-if question accurate to within 1/10 of a plausibility unit. Who wants the machine to show them an alternate reality?
Oh, I want to know
if Germany wins if Hitler stops making decisions.
Red Army in Berlin.
For the what-if machine. I have one.
Do they win if they mass produce the mouse tank?
Mouse tank. Russians in Berlin.
If they took Moscow.
That's so plausible, I can't believe it.
People love rooting for the underdog. These stories strike a chord with us at a very basic level, and you can tell this by how popular these stories are in media. This also translates to real-world stories, although real life does not have a plot that always turns in the underdog's favor. So there's this kind.
Actually, that's a great movie. That's a movie from a German perspective, I think, or a mini-series. I think it has 3 episodes. It's called Unsere Mütter, Unsere Väter. I'm not sure what the English version or English title is, but it's really a great perspective from a German point of view during the Second World War.
Stories, although real life does not have a plot that always turns in the underdog's favor. So there's this kind of romanticism connected to fighting for a lost cause that a lot of people assign to a lot of real-world groups. One of these you see talked about a lot is the German army in World War II, that if only dumb Hitler hadn't been in charge, or if different choices were made, that the war would have turned out different. And a lot of these arguments seem to hold water on the surface, but upon reflection, mostly miss the point or do not make a significant enough change to sway anything. These are my favorite how Germany could have won scenarios, and how they're wrong.
Okay, he's just going to list, like, the most popular, like, theories that he encountered. So, we just take Moscow. Okay.
I hear this one all the time, that if the Germans had just driven onto Moscow and taken it, the Russians would have capitulated. But it is rarely backed up with evidence as to why. Even in the memoirs of German generals after the war, they constantly mention that the drive to Moscow would have meant victory in the East. And I think the reason for this is that they model the Russian campaign after the French campaign. In the French campaign in 1940, the French surrender once Paris is cut off from its forces and looks like it's about to fall. Using this model, a lot of people think that the exact same would apply to Russia. The only problem with this is Russia is a whole different animal, both politically and geographically. Stalin was going to put every man, woman, and child in the Soviet Union between him and the advancing Germans, and this is exemplified by the way the Red Army fought the war, often trading casualties for time. So if Moscow was taken, sure, it's a political and also logistical defeat, given that the rail network was centered around it, but no way do I think Stalin is just going to shrug and say, well, we tried, after Moscow was taken. And with that, we would probably see the Soviet Union fighting to the bitter end, just like the Germans did in reality. This is also backed up by real-world history from Napoleon's Russia campaign in 1812, where he went on to take Moscow but still lost the war. Russia is such a large and vast country that they have the ability to...
With that note on the Napoleonic Wars, yeah, when Napoleon actually took Moscow, so he invaded Russia and took Moscow, because he also thought that Russia is going to fall, but the Russians burned down Moscow, and when the exhausted French came to the city, they had no supplies, nowhere to cover, and so on. So the winter would hit them really, really hard when they arrived to Moscow. So let's just look until the end of the argument.
To trade casualties and land at a higher rate than any other country can. And therefore, the normal rules of war, such as taking the capital and ensuring victory, do not apply.
Are they not seeing this?
Okay, so the argument is, let's take Moscow. I agree with him, like, from a historical point of view, like, the few campaigns that reached deep into Russia, and let's also take Napoleon as a example. When they took Moscow, it wasn't a game changer. And yeah, Stalin, and especially later on his order of not retreating, he was prepared to sacrifice everybody just to keep himself and the Communist Party in power in Russia. So yeah, I don't think that they would surrender because Moscow fell, because they also have like other big cities like Leningrad and Stalingrad. Okay, Stalingrad was under siege, Leningrad, and also, but I agree with him. Like they wouldn't surrender. They would fight to the bitter end. So the next argument is Hitler should have listened to his generals.
Another commonly heard point is that Hitler made terrible decisions and he should have just listened to his generals. Now, I'm not here to defend Adolf Hitler, he's a crazy genocidal maniac, let's not make two ways about it, but this isn't always the case. For example, Hitler and the High Command were all in agreement on invading Russia. They all very much wanted to, in their eyes, destroy communism and save Germany, as Hitler laid out in his book. But once this effort was undertaken, Hitler and his generals began to disagree at times on what moves needed to be made. And once the war is over, many generals in their memoirs begin to claim that Hitler made all the bad decisions, and that if he had just listened to them, the war would have been won. And one example of this I already hinted at in the former point. Hitler's generals were convinced that taking Moscow would end the war for many erroneous reasons I listed previously. For Hitler, Moscow was a general direction in which to head, but was not the final objective. For him, the resources in the Ukraine and the oil fields beyond were a much more important target. And given Germany's oil shortages, this is a good example of where Hitler was right and his generals were wrong. And actually, a lot of Hitler's so-called mistakes start to make a whole lot more sense once you put it into the context of Germany's fuel shortages. And if you want more information on this, Tick did an excellent video on Germany's oil problem that you should really check out. Another example of this sentiment being wrong is Operation Citadel in 1943. Hitler's generals convinced him that an attack on the Kursk Bulge would cripple the Red Army and renew Germany's initiative in the war. Hitler saw this plan as very flawed, though, famously saying, "Every time I think about Operation Citadel, my stomach turns over." And seeing how poorly this turned out for the Germans, his premonition was eerily correct. Now, if this was the caricature of Hitler always overriding his generals that is commonly seen, Citadel would have been called off before it was launched. Now, these are just two quick examples, and yes, there are times, especially later in the war, where Hitler overrules his generals with poor decisions. The Battle of the Bulge comes to mind. But early in the war, when these decisions really count, Hitler is many times making the right decisions when overruling his generals, or going along with them in agreement of a common goal. So, Hitler should have just listened to his generals and he would have won the war is a moot point. Because many times he did, and his generals were wrong, and many times he didn't, and he turned out to be right.
It's all Adolf Hitler, Adolf Hitler, Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, what a lot of people forget is that some of the officers and the German generals that came out of alive and weren't prosecuted after the Second World War and so on, they had a major role, not a major role, but they had a role in writing the history that happened in the High Command. So of course, they would blame Hitler for some bad decisions and not themselves. And that's visible in a lot of biographies that they wrote that are also incorporated into Western, like, bibliographies, books, and so on. But yeah, attacking, yeah, Germany, like Germany was known for, Germany in the Second World War was known for its tanks and that they're highly mobile and for the Luftwaffe, and all those things need oil. Plus, you need to need to also feed more people because everybody's going into the war machine to produce bullets, tanks, aircrafts, and so on. And Ukraine was always seen in Europe as like a big agricultural like state that can produce very, very like big food supplies, and like the famous famine in Ukraine after Stalin, what Stalin did. But yeah, the oil fields in Ukraine and the Caucasus, yeah, they were very important for Germany, and I think also that objective is more important than taking the capital, because taking Moscow, yeah, it's a symbolic victory, as he said, but not a strategic one. Taking Stalingrad, which is way down on the route to the Caucasus, is a symbolic victory, but plus it's, I think, a more strategic, a better strategic target. But yeah, I agree also with this one. Just build more stuff.
This is actually a point I used to subscribe to. A very honest critique of the German war economy is that it was not on the right footing. And people make this argument usually saying things like, Germany should have just made more Panzer IVs instead of pouring resources into the Tiger. Or, Germany should have built the Luftwaffe back up so they could regain
Yeah, what? Just build. I mean, you need materials and resources.
air superiority. And I will give you that the German war economy in many places was an absolute nightmare. John Parshall does an excellent lecture on tank production in World War II and really highlights how backwards the German production process was for armored vehicle manufacturing.
Yeah, eventually, yeah, that's commonly known. Like the Russians and the US, like the most famous maybe tank during the war is the US tank Sherman, and the Russian, I think it's T-34. And as you can see, like the US and the Soviets, they made a bunch more tanks than the Germans had, and they could also trade at a higher rate. One problem with Germany throughout history, like the First World War and the Second World War, is the shortage of manpower. So they would always, like in the, let's just take the case of the First and the Second World War. They would be at war with many countries at once, like always on two fronts, and so on. So the German strategy should have been, or was also actually, to trade more efficiently than the enemy. So for one fallen soldier, he needs to take out, I don't know, let's just say 5 or 10. And also with the tanks. But as you can see, like the Russians can just put in hundreds of extra tanks into that to trade for, I don't know, one Leopard or one Tiger or one whatever. Yeah, interesting.
It mentions how that knowledge can be applied to other types of war manufacturing. And although once Speer takes over, production is streamlined to a degree, and munitions and weapons production goes up year by year, it's not near where it needs to be to fight this attritional war. So obviously, the solution is to just streamline production, sort of how you see in the American model, and this would have given Germany a better chance in the war. Although this is a good criticism, it misses the core issue. The biggest thing Germany was running low on from 1942 onward is, as I mentioned before, oil. And larger numbers of tanks and planes wouldn't be any good if there was no fuel to run them. Also, Germany was having manpower
Logical.
shortages as early as 1942 or
Yeah.
43, and along with fuel to run these machines, you need people to crew them. These are just two issues that cannot be remedied by streamlining production. At a certain point, Germany is just going to be out of oil and out of men, and no amount of additional tanks or planes would operationally be possible.
What's the matter? Run out of gas?
Kinda embarrassing.
Also, to add to that point, yeah, oil was important, but also steel. And I'm not sure, correct me in the comment section below, but as far as I know, Germany was also running low on steel, which is needed to produce tanks and aircrafts and so on. And a lot of the steel that they received came actually from Sweden. Sweden was neutral during the war, so they would collaborate with the Allies, but also with the Germans. And Sweden also took a lot of Jewish refugees, the well-known refugees that came from Denmark to Sweden. They evacuated them and so on. But steel, as far as I know, was also a big problem and a big lack for the Germans. Okay, just coordinate with Japan. No, that was impossible. That was impossible. That would be impossible.
This is another point that deceptively seems to make a lot of sense, as Germany was crushed by a two-front war. It stands to reason that if Japan and Germany through their alliance had coordinated an attack on Russia, they would have won. And that may honestly be true. A big boost to the defense of Moscow came after Russian troops from Siberia were sent west after the Russo-Japanese Non-Aggression Pact. The only problem with this is that coordination did not and was never going to happen. Germany and Japan were allies by circumstance and shared no real common goals with each other. And in fact, they're operating in opposition to each other at times. German training of Chinese troops in the 30s as they were fighting the Japanese is a direct example of this. In short, neither side was going to stick out its neck for the other. In fact, Russia as a common enemy was probably the only instance in which they would have, and even then they did not. The reason for Japan not wanting to do this is mostly colored by the Japanese experience against the Soviets at the Battle of Conchingal, please forgive my pronunciation, where the Red Army gave the Imperial Army a very bloody nose in an undeclared border conflict. This incident convinced the Japanese to not go through with any action that would provoke the Soviet Union, as they did not want war with them, since they were already fighting China and would soon be fighting the United States. This avoidance of provoking the Soviet Union went far enough that during the war in the Pacific between Japan and the United States, the Japanese refused to sink any U.S. merchant ships headed to the Soviet Union. So, the Japanese attacking the Soviet Union directly flies in the face of the intentions and characteristics of the Japanese High Command, to the point where it strays out of potential history,
kill yourself,
into the realm of fantasy.
You have screwed me again.
Japan.
Okay, so the argument is more coordination with Japan. Yeah, as I said at the beginning, no way. So Japan and Germany, yeah, they were allies. And it was actually more detrimental to Germany than to Japan. Why? Because Japan attacked the US, Pearl Harbor, so eventually the US would join the war, and they would open up the Western Front with the D-Day invasion, and give the Germans, of course, a hard time, and also in Africa and Sicily and so on. But coordination was impossible. If you just look at the world map, Germany is... You cannot coordinate troops when you're so far apart. And as he also said, Japan had its own interests and Germany had its own interest. They had more of an ideological alliance. Like they thought that the Germans, like the Übermensch, the theory, and the Japanese felt also like that towards the Koreans and the Chinese and other people. But militarily, it wasn't an alliance. Not even... politically maybe, but it couldn't be done. It couldn't be done. Just look at the world map. It couldn't have been done. You cannot coordinate troops, and no way. I agree with this point also.
This is my favorite one.
Wunderwaffe.
If they had just made insert ridiculous design here, the war may have gone differently. And it's the idea that this thing, or
That's the mouse tank. Mouse means... Is it in English mice? Like the little things that crawl, that the cats eat. But yeah, it wasn't a mouse. A mouse. Like, no. No. Just imagine how much fuel this tank uses for, I don't know, 100 kilometers. Or how much steel you need for just one tank. Nah.
The war may have gone differently. And it's the idea that this thing, or this thing, or this thing would somehow have single-handedly lengthened the war. There are a few fan favorites for pics of these. The one I see most often being the mouse, the ridiculous 200-ton behemoth that in reality would have been awesome target practice for Allied fighter bombers and something for Allied soldiers to gawk at once it had run out of fuel and had to be abandoned. Or German jet aircraft, that although cutting-edge and superior to what the Allies had, still couldn't have been applied in a large scale due to the aforementioned fuel and personnel problems. And the list for these things goes on and on. A personal pet peeve of mine in this category is the what-if question about the German atomic program, and the claim that if they had applied themselves, the Germans could have come up with an atomic weapon first. This notion, though, just like that of Japan invading Russia, very quickly falls into the category of fantasy, once looked at for three main reasons. One, many of Germany's top scientists were expelled in the 30s for being Jewish, automatically limiting German atomic capabilities. And actually, many of these scientists went on to work in the American nuclear program.
Yeah,
so to make this win scenario work, you automatically have to make the Nazis tolerant of Jews, which is not going to happen.
Just a quick note on that. Yeah, the German scientists, some of them left like before the racial laws were implemented. Some of them like during that, and some escaped during the war if they could, if they weren't captured. But not only scientists, artists, musicians, and so on. Like, the Jews in Germany played a big role on a cultural scale. So, like, all the big, I don't know, movies, musicals, or whatever, were written by German Jews. And they were all, expelled or they left. So... if this type of science was considered like a Jew thing, they wouldn't accept it just because of the ideology.
2. The German atomic program is all but canceled.
Let's go back.
Automatically limiting German atomic capabilities. And actually, many of these scientists went on to work in the American nuclear program. So to make this win scenario work, you automatically have to make the Nazis tolerant of Jews, which is not going to happen. 2. The German atomic program is all but canceled by 1942. As Speer put it, we got the view that the development was very much at the beginning. The physicists themselves didn't want to put much into it. Which works into my third point, that Hitler saw atomic science as Jewish science, and pointed the focus of German development towards conventional weapons. So we're not even talking about an atomic race between the US and Germany, as it was barely being pursued by the Germans. And to give a what-if scenario about it would fly directly in the face of what Hitler stood for. And this gets into the bigger problem with this question, that even if Germany does produce these wonder weapons, and extends the war, it's only going to extend it long enough to be the first country to get nuked, due to the Germany first policy of the Allies.
Are you making a
Jet plane?
or remote control the
What? 1 second.
And the bigger problem with this question, that even if Germany does produce these wonder weapons and extends the war, it's only going to extend it long enough to be the first country to get nuked, due to the Germany first policy of the Allies.
Are you making a
Jet plane?
or remote control that can turn you into
Super soldier?
or is it just another dumb
Tank?
Yeah, as I said, because of the ideologies, no, the Nazis wouldn't accept that science, like atomic science of that time. And also, Hitler, because of his personal involvement in the First World War, where he personally witnessed the damage that biological weapons, like the gas, produced on his comrades and everybody else. he also refused to use chemical weapons. And actually, as far as I read about him, is that he preferred conventional warfare. Like, you shoot a bullet, you know where it's going, you know what to damage it, if you know what I mean. Like, okay, there's a bullet, chest on chest fight, artillery is okay, bombing is okay, but no chemicals, no, let's call it extra science weapons. He didn't want them, actually. He didn't want them.
Now, these are just a handful of points that people bring up when talking about how Germany could have won, but there are many more that I didn't go into that are equally baseless, such as the Germans should have and could have invaded England, even though the Kriegsmarine would not be able to support a large amphibious attack, and the much larger Royal Navy would have probably sunk the invading force before it even reached the shores. Or that Barbarossa should have taken place earlier, even though it wasn't really the winter or the rainy season that stopped the Germans, it was a lack of supplies that needed to be brought up. For more info on that, check out this lecture by David Stayhill. You'll see people bringing up scenario after scenario that bends reality and character motivations very widely to craft a scenario that Germany could win. But here's my point. Germany would not have won World War II no matter what way you slice it. The fact of the matter is, this is a country that is too small and too short on resources to take on the three largest world powers at once, especially given the erroneous actions and motivations they have. Basically, the Germans dealt themselves a bad hand and played it poorly. And the only way that's going to change is if you bend time and space to their liking with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. All things that are not going to happen in reality.
I actually agree with all his points, like the way he, let's say, debunked them. But yeah, people always stretch the what if question. What if this didn't happen? What if that didn't happen? What if Hitler was never born? There's a lot of what if questions, but people don't go deeper into the topic, don't research that much. And the thing with today's society is also we oversimplify everything. Like he said, let's just make the a super rocket or a super tank. If they just made that, they would have won. But you need to, as I said in the beginning, you need to take into the context, Germany had a lower population than the rest of the Allies combined. They had lower oil supplies, steel supplies. Also, in some of the territories that they occupied, like, let's say, Greece, Yugoslavia, Poland, and many other places, also France, they constantly needed to put down the different resistant groups. On the Balkans, they needed to have, I think it was 500,000 or something like ridiculous like that. I don't know how many 100,000 extra troops just to keep that region somewhat under control. So yeah, I understand, and I actually think that he's right about all of these topics. And as you can see, like the oil supplies of Germany, that's the main point. They couldn't support their mechanized armies with all the tanks, Luftwaffe, and so on without oil. So oil was actually one of the major factors. And also with Japan. Japan had also the same problem with oil supplies. And Japan had actually a larger oil problem because everything that they did depended on their fleet, like the Imperial Japanese fleet. So yeah, an interesting thing, and it's also always interesting how people try to find new ways to ask what ifs, but don't dig deeper into the topic before they ask that. Okay, so I hope that you enjoyed it, and once again, hit the subscribe button if you want. All the additional information for this video and for the channel are in the link below, in the description below. And tomorrow we're gonna see part 2. So yeah, see ya.